All right, here we go. Hello, everybody. Geoff Keeley. Happy Saturday to you all. We are live to talk about the final hours of Half-Life Alyx, my new app about Valve software in the past decade. And today I'm going to read you the first three chapters of it, a little Saturday afternoon summer read. If you don't know, this is a 25,000 word interactive storybook about the making of the brand new Half-Life game from Valve, but also the past decade inside the company, all the projects and stuff that they were working on. So I'm really excited to have it out. You can buy it now on Mac and PC, but I want to give you a little preview and kind of walk you through the app and what we did. So we're going to do that live here on Steam. This is so cool. We can broadcast live. We're also on Twitch and Twitter and YouTube and a bunch of other places. Since we got this all set up for Summer Game Fest, I'm like, let's do it. But first, maybe I'll show you the trailer for the app. Yes, we have a trailer for the app and an amazing remake of Triage of Dawn from Half-Life or Half-Life 2 that we put together for this. So I'll show you the trailer and then we'll come back. I'll load up the app and do some live reading. I'm happy to also answer questions. The Steam chat actually has been fantastic. A lot of great questions when I was live there the other day. So I'm going to answer some questions as well about that. And if we want to talk about Summer Game Fest stuff, we can too. Anyways, here's the trailer for the final hours of Half-Life Alyx, and I will be right back to start reading.
I got nothing to say about Half-Life.
Well, it's not dead anyway.
I have nothing to say about Half-Life.
Welcome to Valve Software in Bellevue, Washington. 22 years ago, when I was in college, I visited Valve to write a story about the making of the original Half-Life. That's me, my flip phone, and Gabe Newell in 1998. Now, over the past decade, I've wondered, just like you, if Valve would ever make another Half-Life. Well, 13 years after Episode 2, I'm back inside Valve to tell you the story of just how it happened. This is the behind-the-scenes tale of how a passionate team banded together, despite the obstacles, to build something we all worried might never come to pass: the next great Half-Life game.
I'm with you every step of the way.
All right, we're back. So yeah, I'm gonna answer some questions, I guess, about the app. But first of all, maybe I'll just do my live reading since I promised it to you guys. It's already 10 minutes past the hour. So I'm gonna load up the app here, and hopefully this is all gonna work. How we're gonna do this, and we will go live here and check out the app. So let's see. Let's hope this all works. All right. So this is the final hours of Half-Life Alyx, and this is a cool interactive menu that you can call up. This is a model of the Citadel that was given to me by the guys at Valve. A lot of the team was very kind in giving us content from the game that we were able to sort of put together and make a part of this. So this is the main menu and this interactive Alyx thing. And a lot of the sounds we also got from the Valve sound team. So Roland Shaw worked with us to put together a lot of cool stuff. This 3D model is a under construction Citadel that Tristan Reedford gave to us. So let's begin this app and kind of walk you through the first three chapters of it. And again, I'm not going to read through the whole thing. I'm sure lots of people have already read it, and I'll try and answer some questions at the end. But this is really just a chance to kind of give you a sense of what the experience is for this. So this is the introduction. On Friday, October 30th, 1998, I sent Valve co-founder Gabe Newell an email from the computer lab at the University of Southern California. Thanks for taking the time to show me around. I had a great time. I tapped into the keyboard. That's a photo of me and Gabe in 1998 when I was in his office. This was right about when they were going to ship the original Half-Life, and I had gone up there to hang out with Gabe. One of the first times I had like a big sushi lunch in my life, I remember, and I was like nervous about how good I was with chopsticks. And Gabe and I went to have like sushi for lunch and went back in his office. And this was in Kirkland, where Valve originally was, their first office in Kirkland, Washington, not in Bellevue. And I was in college, so I think I took the day off from school and went up with my trusty tape recorder you can see there and my flip phone. And spent a day at Valve as they were about to ship the original Half-Life, which was kind of crazy. So I was emailing him, thanking him for that visit. Anyways, continuing on. I'm not quite sure why I saved that email or why I kept 5 different alpha and beta discs from the original Half-Life. I showed those the other day on the stream. I still have them. Don't worry. They are archived, and one day we will find the right way to show all that to the world. Maybe I'll build a museum or something. Who knows? Anyway, sensing Valve software was up to something special, I spent the next few months of my sophomore year writing the final hours of Half-Life, a behind-the-scenes look at the making of that game. Now, over the past 22 years, I've chronicled the evolution of Valve with stories about the making of Half-Life 2, which I did, another final hours, and Portal 2 in 2011. The Portal 2 one, if you haven't read it, it's available on Steam today as well. You can check that out. Now, 9 years later, we return to Valve for the final hours of Half-Life Alyx. This story details the past decade inside the company and the decision to return to Half-Life, a franchise that seemed lost to the ages. I think we'd all agree with that. I never wrote the final hours of Half-Life intending to start an anthology spanning multiple decades. Now looking back, I'm honored to help chronicle an essential part of video game history. In some ways, I feel like Michael Apted, the director of the Up documentary series, also directed a James Bond film, who has tracked the lives of the same 14 British children every 7 years from the age of 7 up until 63 and counting. And if you haven't seen this documentary series, it's fascinating. He does it, I think, now with the BBC, but look it up on like Wikipedia or something up. It's an amazing story, and it's literally a bunch of kids that he started interviewing when they were 7 years old, and now they're 63. It's spanned, 50 years. And it's really interesting to see like where people's lives go, right? And I think it's always fascinated me about people's stories and how lives ebb and flow. And there are a couple of them like refused to be interviewed in some of the shows and then came back. And it's just, anyways, an amazing documentary series. That's an aside. Valve is a different place than the scrappy startup I visited in 1997, which is absolutely true. Back then, I sat on the floor of Gabe's office as he and his wife assembled Half-Life manuals and dreamed of winning Game of the Month from PC Gamer. Today, Valve is one of the game industry's most powerful companies, but certainly not its most prolific or understood. The company's self-professed no-hierarchy organizational structure has led to inefficiencies and periods of creative drought, which we've all felt, I think, as fans. But ultimately, you can't argue with the result. Half-Life Alyx is a shining example of what Valve does at its best. With every final hours, I try to make use of new technologies to bring you closer to the game and the people behind it. Special thanks to David Clark, our incredible Unity software developer, and Chuck Kerr, our talented designer, for helping bring my vision for this Steam app to life. I can't thank these guys enough. This really was sort of a 3-person team that built this entire project over the past, really 6 months. And it was not the easiest with everything going on with the pandemic, and there are lots of aspects of this app that we wanted to do some more photos with the Valve team. There were some more video elements and things we wanted to do, but unfortunately everyone at Valve kind of disbanded to home. So these guys, though, worked from home and supported me. David, amazing developer that worked on Ori and the Blind Forest and really brought this whole vision to life. I met with him. He lives over in the United Kingdom, and I met with him in earlier this year when I was in London. I wrote a lot of this in London and Paris earlier this year when I was there for a few weeks, and met with David back then, and we came up with our vision for kind of creating this interactive magazine format, and we used Unity to bring it all to life. And Chuck is an incredible art director and designer who has worked at Variety, right, or works right now in Entertainment Weekly, where I actually used to write reviews of video games way back in the day. and he helped sort of bring this vision to life. So again, thanks to those guys for kind of creating what I hope if you've checked out this app, you feel it's pretty impressive about, just how it all feels. And I come from a writing background. I know everyone just wants to watch YouTube videos now and listen to podcasts, but I really wanted to preserve the written word and tell you a story, but in a new format with a lot of cool 3D and technology around it. So I hope you guys agree that it was something new and different. And if you haven't seen it yet, I'm going to show it to you right now. Where did I leave off? Oh yeah, thanking Chuck and David. And actually, this is cool. This is the actual email that I sent to Gabe. I've archived a lot of the discs of games I've received over the years. Not just Half-Life. I have a lot of games from 20 or 30 years that I actually store and archive. And one day I'll probably open up some of those archives and share those with people. But I actually started as a beta tester for Sierra Online games back in the day when I was a kid. I was 12 or 13 years old. Actually, I probably have those discs. Hold on. I'm going to show you the first game beta of a game I ever got when I was a kid. All right, I'm back, finding things in my archive. So these are actually, remember IBM discs? These are 3.5-inch discs, and this is an old Sierra game. You used to get like stacks of discs here. Some of you are probably too young to know this, but you'd go buy old adventure games, and they would literally have all these discs in the box. They were these big boxes. And this was the first game I beta tested for Sierra, called EcoQuest 2 on 11/13/1992. I kept this. There were all these discs, and you'd install all the discs for the game. And here are my save files for all 4 of the betas of EcoQuest 2, and this is dated January 8th, 1993. So I always keep that around because that was the first game I got. I was just a volunteer kid, super young. I was, I think, in the 6th or 7th grade, and I wrote a letter to Sierra asking them if I could help learn how they made their games, and they sent that back to me, and I got to beta test a bunch of their games. Anyways, this is the email that I sent Gabe from that computer lab, because I have all my emails archived from back then too. Let me just read you this email too. You're getting a bonus of an email reading. Gabe, first of all, thanks so much for accommodating my visit to Valve earlier this week to do the feature story. I really appreciate you taking the time to show me around. I had a great time. I'm trying to get multiplayer going here, and things just hang on the One login. One was like the online service that I think Sierra was using. I forget what it stood for, but it was WON. Well, they don't just hang, but it sits there for 15 seconds on the gray screen and then just goes back to the game menu. Quick start doesn't work. Any ideas? Question mark. I'd love to get a multiplayer in with some of you guys. Get a multiplayer in. Isn't that so funny? That's what I said back in the day. I'd love to get a multiplayer in with some of you guys this weekend. Anyways, I know you're really busy finishing things up, so this is a low priority. Don't worry. Thanks again, and talk to you soon. If you want to call me or have someone call me to get rolling, my home number is blank. Oh, and by the way, the air duct in the meat locker room during day 1 is still way too hard to jump into. I had this same problem with the OEM. And the OEM version, I think that OEM was a version that came like with a graphics card. It might have been like a 3DFX card or something. You got the day 1 demo with, I don't know if it was 3DFX or something. It's so frustrating. It makes me stop playing the game. And look, I'm even using emojis as a young kid in 1998. Frown. Thanks, Geoff. And I actually have tons of other emails with Gabe and the team from back in the day. Again, that's all archived, and one day I'll share more of that stuff. But anyways, back to our app. Telling this story would not have been possible without the unwavering trust of everyone at Valve. Early on in the project, Greg Coomer, Robin Walker, and Casey Boyle walked me into a team meeting and told everyone to be open and honest about everything: team dynamics, canceled projects, and the overall creative process. For months, I walked around the office and interviewed the team in an unstructured and unsupervised way. One of the things a lot of people ask me about this app is, well, how did you get all this access? Why was Valve willing to tell you everything? Obviously, I have a long relationship with not just Gabe, but a lot of the folks at Valve who I've known for decades. And I can't tell you how much it means to me that they just trusted me to come in and observe things. for a very long period of time. I was there a lot and literally just kind of walked in every morning and said hello to everyone, and I just kind of talked to everyone directly, and it was a tremendous amount of trust is needed for these final hours stories, and that's why I do so few of them, because it's kind of there's a trust on both sides that I'm going to get a great story out of it, and then the game team feels like I'm going to kind of properly represent their work and be honest about things. And to Valve's credit, like I fund these projects all myself, so this isn't a Valve project at all. I guess they benefit from the same 30% that anything on Steam gives to Valve. But yeah, it's really just my own thing, and Valve just says, hey, how can we help you? How can we support you? And same thing with like what I researched and wrote and everything. They said to everyone, hey, talk about whatever you want to talk about. And often employees would say to me, like, I'm allowed to talk about that? Really? Wow. And we went through everything, and to Valve's credit, they didn't ask me to remove anything about any game that, I kind of chose how I wanted to write about things and what I did and didn't want to write about. And what's great about Valve is they're just fully trusting of that. I fact checked some things with them, but generally, like, all the things I wanted to talk about, they were like, cool. You can play these old builds, you can talk about things and find the story you want. So very rare and special company. Thanks to Gabe, Eric Johnson, Doug Lombardi, Jake Rodkin, Roland Shaw, Greg, Robin, Casey, and everyone at Valve for being so open with me and your customers. And thanks to my friends and family for their patience. I oversubscribed myself by taking on this project, but Valve's return to Half-Life is something I simply couldn't turn down. I wish I could do more of these final hours. I just get so busy with other projects and things. It's hard. I haven't done the final hours, I think, in 5 years. And this one was, at one point, this game was going to come out, I think, in November last year, and it's challenging to do anything kind of in the later half of the year because I have the Game Awards, and that's a massive project that I'm spending a lot of time on right now. And these final hours are very personal projects to me. I do all the interviews personally. I transcribe them myself just because I literally can't even trust a company to transcribe stuff because things are so secretive. And I write all of them myself. And again, I worked with David and Chuck on this, but this is not ghostwritten by anyone. I don't have a team of people doing this. It's really something I write myself. And this one I really wrote, as I said, a lot sort of through the early parts of the quarantine and a lot in Europe when I was there in February. I spent a couple weeks over there working on this, and then came back and in quarantine finished writing it. Anyways, Valve's return to Half-Life is something I simply couldn't turn down, and that's the thing. I've always been waiting to do another one of these about Valve. For a while, I was worried there wasn't going to be another one to do. So the fact that they were doing this game made me feel like this was the right time. It's been a long time since we've done one, and I'm honored that we got to do it. And I hope that no matter what, this story inspires you to see how, after a decade, it is possible to return to something you love and make it even better. I think there's such a great story in this that Valve did return to Half-Life, did the highest rated Half-Life game that they've ever done. And I think that's amazing because there definitely was a lot of trepidation about how do you live up to the memories in our mind's eye, right? We look at things through sort of rose-colored glasses, to use an old Fitzgerald term of just sort of thinking of, things in... You remember games sometimes better in your mind than the reality of it, right? And for those of us that have played games for a long time, I go back and play like old adventure games, other things, I'm like, wow, really? Like, you remember them being so much more beautiful and rich than they really were. And that's the thing, is Half-Life grows in our memory, I think, over the years. So the fact that Valve came back to it and made this such an incredible game is exciting. And I hope this is something that, even if you don't have virtual reality, you can still be a part of this experience and kind of see a little bit of the game and understand it. Because as we say in the app, I think only 1% of Steam customers have VR right now. But it's still an amazing story, and I hope it leads to a lot more from Valve. And this is a photo of me on location earlier this year at Valve. Ollie Moss took a bunch of these photos in this app. Some of them are taken by me, but he took a lot. And we also, our friends at Edge Magazine gave us a bunch of photos. Because again, we had a huge plan for lots of photo shoots we were going to be doing at Valve, and then that didn't happen because of the pandemic and the quarantine. So anyways, that's the introduction. Now let's move on to chapter 1. This is a beautiful piece of art Mike McQuaid made for us. He's one of my sort of favorite photo collage artists out there. He does a lot for the New York Times, and he did 2 pieces for us in this app. This one here in Chapter 1, and then in Chapter 8 with Christine Fallan. But anyways, this is James Benson, and this is such an incredible story about James. James works at Valve, but as you'll see in my reading, he has an amazing backstory about being a fan just like us of Valve games, and now he works inside of the company. So when I heard James's full story, I'm like, we just have to kind of frame the app around this. It's not a Gabe story. It's not a story about Robin Walker. It's really sort of it's something about Gabe. It's really something about James and his story. So I think it's an interesting way in. So here we go. Chapter 1, and Chapter 1's name is The Gift for Burning. I'll talk a little bit about why I called it The Gift for Burning, and this amazing poet that Adrienne Rich that sort of inspired me through a lot of these months. Some of her work really was exciting to me and helped frame things up. So Chapter 1, The Gift for Burning. Here we go, my official reading. And by the way, let me just show you the app and how it's set up. This is the contents. So there are 15 chapters to the app that you can kind of go through and navigate. And then this is kind of our general nav. There's sort of an about screen here where you can kind of see all this great stuff. Oh look, there's MetroCop popping around. We got to use a lot of the 3D models from the actual game, which is really kind of fun and unique. Populated throughout the app. And then this is a 3D tour of Valve that I'll show you later, but we photo scanned the entire 14th floor of Valve, which is kind of amazing, and I can't believe we actually got the chance to do that. But it was really, really exciting that we got to show you inside of Valve. There's actually like a first-person mode where you can like walk around Valve, believe it or not. So that's something that you can check out in the app and explore all the offices and see. And maybe we'll do that at the end. We'll kind of go through that. So anyways, let's start with Chapter 1. And it's a long story, as I think you guys know, 25,000 words. So it takes many hours to read through, but let's do the first 3 chapters. Here we go. Story time with Geoff. Should get some water. I do have some water. Hold on, I'm going to take a chug of water before we begin our reading. And I'll do some questions at the end, too. Here we go. And even though it's like I've read this so many times, it's new to me every time. Here we go. When he was 9 years old in 1998, James J. Benson would close his eyes and imagine the immersive thrill of playing a specific video game. Growing up the son of a divorced primary school teacher and a Royal Air Force navigator on an AWACS aircraft, Benson most of the time lived at his mum's house in Southport, England, with nary a computer in sight. But every other weekend, Jay visited Dad and Dad's PC on the RAF Waddington base. On most Saturdays, Benson and his dad went fishing or took a bike ride around the shed. But if Jay, or a jazzman as his dad called him, was being really honest, well, all he wanted to do was boot up his pop's PC and stand inside his dream, a video game named Half-Life. Since he could only sneak in a couple of hours of gameplay every other weekend, it took young Benson over 6 months to maneuver his way out of the Black Mesa Research Facility, meet the G-Man, and finish Half-Life. And that was only after carefully copying in his saved game files not to erase his dad's. Back in the day, as you can tell, you had to sort of copy your files in, and you didn't have multiple, login IDs or anything. To Jay Benson and to millions of gamers around the world, playing Half-Life with its alchemic blend of genre-defining narrative, intense combat, and vibrant ambiance was a formative experience. Half-Life has cascaded through gaming and popular culture for more than 2 decades. Some people play and appreciate video games from a distance, treating them as no more than an escapist hobby. Jay Benson, it turns out, is not one of those people. Even in the years after Half-Life's release, Benson couldn't stop thinking about the game's most resonant moments, which tumbled through his mind like lucid dreams. And there is Jay at the office. This is actually, as you'll see in a minute, his Half-Life CD that he keeps at his desk at Valve. When he flunked out spoiler, I guess, Jay works at Valve. Getting ahead of myself in the story. When he flunked out of university at age 17 and started serving baked beans to old ladies at a local cafe, Benson sat in the break room, closed his eyes, and started daydreaming once again. This time, he set an audacious personal goal. In 3 years, he told himself, he was going to get a job working at Valve, one of the most venerated game developers in the world. There was just one problem, however, or perhaps many. You see, Jay didn't have any particular game design skills beyond bashing together what might charitably be described as fanfic levels in the RPG game Neverwinter Nights. The construction set is part of that. He didn't program, he didn't draw, although his girlfriend Jenny thought him to be a very creative individual. Undeterred, Jazzman flew to the Game Developers Conference in San Francisco to hone, or perhaps better put, to discover his unrevealed craft. His first stop? A game design talk by Robin Walker, a Valve developer behind Team Fortress 2. This is all absolutely what happened. It's kind of crazy. Galvanized by Walker's 1-hour GDC session, Benson spun into action. He described his mindset to the Chris Katz Team Fortress podcast in 2010. If you want to do something great, feeling relaxed is a bad feeling, he said over voice chat. Why am I going home and browsing the internet or watching Glee or House when I could be creating something? And if you look this up, you can Google this, the Chris Katz podcast. It's still online. It's like a 40-minute conversation with Jay, which was really fun to listen to and discover a little bit more of his story. Benson, though, formulated a plan. Over the next year, he would teach himself how to create game animation, working at his girlfriend's parents' house from 9 a.m. to 3 a.m. every day. I am a withered husk of a man, like the Charger in Left 4 Dead 2, just one giant arm clicking a mouse, Benson explained to the podcast. To track his progress, he wrote down how many frames of animation he completed every day in a Steamworks diary book from GDC. If he didn't get anything done, he forced himself to write no finished frames to memorialize his laziness. On those days he wrote those words, Benson remembered a quote from Valve co-founder Gabe Newell he read in Edge magazine. The greatest fear most people have is being scared for the loss of their abilities. And this is kind of insane. This is a video that Jay made and posted to YouTube. I'm getting a little ahead of the story. But he made a trailer of kind of reimagining Half-Life with new animations. And what's amazing about this trailer is there's so many moments in it that remind me of Half-Life Alyx. Like, look at some of these things. And sort of that first-person kinetic VR stuff. And this was a kid in UK who did this all himself as this Half-Life trailer. This got millions of views on YouTube. And again, you can watch it on YouTube now, and just like such fun stuff. That he did this all by himself as a kid in the UK, auditioning to get a job at a game company. Anyways, on June 10th, 2010, Benson posted his first animation to YouTube, a 20-second clip of the sniper in Team Fortress dancing to CNC Music Factory's Gonna Make You Sweat, Everybody Dance Now. You can find James's channel still on YouTube. We could probably go and find it after, and like all his Team Fortress dance videos, amazing stuff. He's such a talented kid. And again, all of it's still online to go and watch. I would love it if somebody working in the business could tell me a ballpark estimation of how my skill level is doing in regard to being a professional proposition. Thanks for your time. He posted on the Polycount forum as Jazzman9575. The 9575, in case you were wondering, was his iPhone pin at the time. Benson clearly had a knack for something. His series of whimsical Team Fortress videos gained hundreds of thousands of views on YouTube. Emboldened, he turned to Half-Life and spent 6 weeks creating a reimagined trailer for the original game with fluid new animations for Gordon Freeman's hands and in-game enemies like the headcrabs, what I just showed you. The video quickly went viral, amassing over 2 million views. Animator gets bored waiting, starts creating his own version of Half-Life 3, read the headline on Geek.com. By now, you're probably wondering when Gabe Newell sends Jay Benson an email inviting him to come work at the Dream Factory. Those videos were 100% auditions to get Valve's attention, Benson now sheepishly admits, but they didn't work. The email from Gabe, it never arrived. And here's Jay at his desk, some other photos of him, Headcrab model, Half-Life CD, PC Gamer, Game of the Month on it. Determined to wheedle his way in, Benson applied for a Valve job at age 21, just as he told himself he would. He didn't get past the phone interview. The second time he applied, Benson managed to get an in-person interview in Seattle. But after taking beta blockers due to sheer nerves, he screwed up the interview question about designing a villain for Aquaman. Anyone who works at Valve probably does have a story about their interview and some of the interview questions, some of the game design problems they'll give you. And again, I don't want to spoil too much of some of the questions they ask people, but he's absolutely right. I think he was asked in an interview, it's like, so how would you design a villain for Aquaman? And just they kind of look at how your mind works and how you solve problems and how you think about things. So it's a fascinating interview process they go through with anyone that applies and they want to sort of chat with. but James struck out twice. He got the phone interview, he got rejected, and then he got to go in person, and also got rejected as well. So it wasn't meant to be. Hapless, Benson settled for a $22,000 a year job as a junior animator at Lionhead Studios on the canceled Connect game Milo and Kate from Peter Molyneux in Guildford, England. After getting laid off there, he worked on animation for a series of acclaimed games, the indie darling Ori and the Blind Forest, and Campo Santo's brilliant Firewatch. No matter what game he was animating, Benson kept a totem by his desk side, his dad's CD jewel case for the original Half-Life with a PC Gamer Game of the Month sticker on it. Again, like, you can't make this stuff up, but this is actually true. With his Valve dreams thwarted, Benson, like the rest of the gaming world, carried a faint hope for a consolation prize, getting to play a new Half-Life game, which saw its last installment, Half-Life 2 Episode 2, released 13 years ago in 2007. It's Monday, February 3rd, 2020, the day after the Super Bowl at 3 p.m. sharp. Just off the lobby of Valve's 14th floor office in Bellevue, Washington, a stream of people begins to file into a large open room customarily reserved for VR playtesting. In total, more than 80 employees of Valve, nearly one quarter of the company, are arriving for the weekly status meeting on Half-Life Alyx. This full-on virtual reality game marks Valve's triumphant return to both Half-Life franchise and single-player story-driven games. This is sort of the Battle of Helm's Deep in terms of Valve, the largest team we've ever had on a project, explains Jim Hughes, a Valve designer and Star Wars superfan who in his spare time kit bashes and 3D prints models of TIE bombers and X-Wings. One day he plans to refilm the Death Star trench run in his living room. And this is the actual Monday meeting at Valve headquarters. You saw a little bit of this in the trailer, but here's Robin Walker and the team hanging out. This is to Geoff Coley and Jeff Lane kind of walking to the meeting. Here's Robin, Greg Coomer, Tristan Reedford. This is kind of the board that they had. So I was here, it was right around here kind of in February, and this kind of listed out the final weeks of development on the game. They had to do some last-minute pickup voiceover with Russell on February 19th. Reese Darby, the voice of Russell, I think he was on vacation or something, so they had to wait for that. And you can sort of see as they were finalizing things, they had a couple weeks at the end of February for serious bugs, and then showstoppers only, which was kind of in March. And March 20th was the date they had to finalize the game, and then it came out the next, I think March 23rd was the date that it actually came out. So they did an incredible job keeping to the schedule, and as you'll read, the pandemic kind of shut them down in March, but they finished it from home. So anyways, here's a close-up of the board, all the different things. And again, Valve just let me take photos and include these, so very open and honest with everyone about everything. There's Greg Coomer, and there's sort of the team in this main room. And this board Robin has kind of listed out everyone's name and some of the tasks that they had to, I don't know if you can see these or not. You can't really see them, but anyways. Oh, and there's James Benson right there. Spoiler alert. Not it? Yep. All right, let's keep reading. And I spoiled some of what you're about to read. But as a developer circle up around product lead Robin Walker, it's hard not to be struck by the generations represented, and that the team is still predominantly male and white, something Greg Coomer at Valve acknowledges it needs to fix. There are veterans who shipped the original Half-Life more than 2 decades ago next to those who worked on the equally acclaimed Half-Life 2 in 2004. Sprinkled amongst them are a new batch of developers who joined Valve in the past decade, hoping that they might one day get to help create a new Half-Life. One of the people in that last category nervously stands off to the side in an Oxford shirt, gnawing at the plastic top of a water bottle. His name, this is where it all comes together, the jazzman himself, Jay Benson, who joined Valve when it acquired Campo Santo in 2018. We can tell you the story about how when Benson received access to Valve's computer network, he summarily downloaded every canceled project and was flagged by IT as a hacker, but we'll spare him that full embarrassment. That's a true story. Jay told me that he got very excited when he finally got access to Valve's network. With the group assembled into a semicircle, Walker stands between 2 whiteboards filled with words and charts. One board correlates team member names, such as Tristan Reedford, with tasks like finishing a weapon skin. And Tristan, this is absolutely true, he refuses to play any section of the game with a head crab in it because it freaks him out in VR, and he will hold the headset at a distance and kind of play that section because he just can't handle them. But he's a super talented artist. I first met him on Portal 2 when we wrote the final hours of that. The other whiteboard, as I kind of described, is a calendar for the next 6 weeks broken into 3 phases. Final development, serious bugs only, and showstoppers only, meaning bugs that would cause the game to crash. If everything goes according to plan, it all culminates on March 20th. Circled in red is the date Half-Life Alyx will be complete after 4 years of top-secret development. As the meeting begins, Walker, an affable Australian with a well-coiffed development beard, looks around and addresses the assembled mass. A lot of people are setting their bugs to critical because it's the default. Please check if it's really critical before logging it that way, he says. Also, someone who has been trying to simulate playing the game through with one functional arm. We want to support this, so we need an owner that can take that on. And again, that's an accessibility feature. And no, I'm not going to do voices and accents for you guys. Sorry. Any update on performance? Walker Ash, shorthand for inquiring if there are any issues with the game's frame rate dropping. A critical issue in a VR game that needs to run at 90 frames per second in 3D. Half-Life Alyx looks amazing, and when you consider that it is running at 90 frames per second stereo, so 290 FPS streams of those visuals, it's pretty spectacular. It's starting to look a lot better than it has in a while, so that's promising, responds Michael Kuplin, an 11-year veteran of Valve who admits he hasn't yet shipped a game at Valve because his projects keep getting canceled. That's sort of an in-joke for everyone at Valve, is that Kuplin is an incredible programmer, coder, designer, but has never actually shipped a game because a lot of things get canceled at Valve. But please prioritize minimum spec machines on your playtest, he tells the team. There's Robin Walker, and there is James Benson right there. So this was kind of telling the story. Chris Remo, who I've known for a long time, is a super talented guy. Jim Hughes, actually the guy with the TIE Fighter bomber right there. Jane Ng, and yeah, lots of good people across the entire company. At the opposite end of the room, Dario Casali, who designed levels for the original Half-Life from 22 years ago, throws out a question about the level he's been heading up. The Vault, as it's known, is the final sequence, which has gone through a significant overhaul in the past 6 months. Are we still getting external playtesters through, he asks the room. Yes, but the last two couldn't get through to the end of the game. Schedule problems, explains designer Geoff Lane, who heads up the playtests when he isn't racing motorcycles. Well, I'm not getting enough data on the last map, Casali admonishes the group. We have 3 weeks to change the balance, and not enough people are playing through it. We talk about the Vault, the end of the game, significantly. It really changed a lot, and I did my first complete playthrough of the entire game in the summer of 2019, and the Vault was very different then, and it got changed significantly, and that's what sort of Dario is referring to. You know, if you read, a lot of people ask me also if this app has spoilers in it, and there certainly are spoilers about the story. We don't go in depth about every element of the story, but we talk about some plot points that didn't fit in, and we talk definitely sort of about the resolution of it. So, you know, I imagine by now you've probably, if you're watching this, you've played the game or watched YouTube videos or things like that around it. But anyways, back to our story. Finally, Walker turns to his right. He looks to Benson, probably not even realizing he inspired him to get into game development a decade ago. Jay, how are the gameplay videos coming along? Benson, tasked with editing a series of 3 gameplay videos for YouTube, opens his eyes wide, lifts his chin, and cracks a smile. Oh, quite well, he says. The Subway survival horror video is watchable now, and I'd love some feedback from you guys. To some, Half-Life Alyx represents nothing more than an ambitious, bordering on absurd virtual reality experiment for a limited audience. After all, just 1% of Steam customers own a VR headset. But to those who know Valve best, Alyx serves as a much bigger inflection point for one of the video game industry's most revered studios. Often seen as mysterious, impenetrable, and downright unpredictable, Valve's traditional game output has dramatically decreased, or rather downright stopped, over the past decade. Flush with billions of dollars in revenues from Steam, Valve's industry-leading PC distribution service, some wondered if Valve was impervious to its clamoring fan base and resigned to let Half-Life live on only in our memories. Half-Life Alyx proves otherwise. We get that there's this public perception that everyone who worked on Half-Life left and that Valve doesn't know how to make these games anymore, explains Phil Coe, a veteran Valve-level designer. Part of what motivated us on this project was to show everyone what this place is still capable of creating. As it turns out, Valve has been creating over the past decade, with little of that work publicly exposed. Half-Life Alyx, for instance, represents at least Valve's 6th attempt to do something new with Half-Life since Half-Life 2 Episode 2 ended in 2007 with the illusory promise of Half-Life 2 Episode 3, which we're all still waiting for. Valve is in the unique position of having what poet Adrian Rich phrase, the gift for burning. And this is an aside, but I don't know if you're familiar with Adrienne Rich. She's an incredible poet, feminist poet, incredible life story. And she's no longer with us, but read the poem Gift for Burning if you ever get a chance. It's a beautiful piece that I came across probably about a year ago. And I just think this phrase, gift for burning, is something that I think is unique to Valve, that they are able to sort of, it is a gift that they can sort of burn things that they don't think are good enough to put out for people. So unlike many other creative studios, Valve has the luxury, or you could argue the curse, of shutting down and redoing projects ad infinitum until something emerges that is deemed worthy of its customers' time and money. Now, for the first time, Valve opens up about the past decade behind closed doors. From canceled projects, the struggles to create a new game engine, Source 2, and a bet the company push into hardware and virtual reality, shipping Half-Life Alyx is the bright end of a decade-long season filled with the highest of highs and the lowest of lows. This chapter at one point I was going to call the bright end of nowhere, but then I changed it to the gift for burning. It's a little final hours of the final hours for you. A lot of people came to Valve because of what they thought it represented, and it hasn't always been that place for the past decade. Walker openly admits to me one afternoon. For those of us who were here in our first decade, we knew Valve could still be that. Some of this project was about trying to give the people who joined Valve in the second decade that experience we felt in the first. I thought that was a really interesting way Robin put it. Walker pauses for a minute and closes his eyes as if to remember the indescribable yet magical feeling that comes with shipping a genre-defining game. It is perhaps the exact feeling that young, impressionable Jay Benson picked up on when he heard Walker's talk back in the 2010 Game Developers Conference. Oh my God, it's a head crab. It's a jump scare. Yeah, we did that. Just fun. We wanted to do some fun, like little 3D things, and take this to sort of another level. So it was fun to program that in, and it's the actual model, and again, it looks like a regular kind of web page, and then we love kind of throwing in some 3D fun like that. So hope we didn't scare anybody, but it was effective. Anyways, Walker then continues speaking in a way that suggests, like any good programmer, he's found a more efficient way to express his thoughts. I guess you could say this is the story of how we fixed Valve. And I think that's really one of the most important points of this story, is that, yes, it's about Half-Life Alyx and just a VR game, but why I wanted to write this is I really think that Valve was broken in a way, and a lot of things going on, a lot of interpersonal things, a lot of company things, a lot of things going on, and we lost Valve for a while in terms of making really awesome story-driven single-player games. And Robin and Greg Coomer and a number of other folks, I think, really wanted to get Valve back to that place, and it wasn't easy. So this is a story about Alyx, but it really is a look at the past decade of Valve and some of the challenges they faced and where I think they are now, which is in a really good place. So that's the end of Chapter 1, and now we move on to Chapter 2. These are really cool. We worked with Jake Rotkin at Valve to bring this to life and actually take scenes from the source engine and bring them into our app. Now this is video based. It's not fully 3D, but it's a really cool concept that you can kind of scroll through. You see the vault there, you see City 17, and this is actually captured custom in the game for this app, which is tons of fun. So this is chapter 2 of 3, polygons and presence. My Apple Watch is telling me I need to stand because I haven't stood all hour, but like you can cheat your Apple Watch if you don't know. You just go like this, but I'm not going to do that. All right, chapter 2, polygons and presence. It's almost 3 o'clock. Oh my God, this is a lot. This is long. I did a full reading. I wonder how long this will probably be all day. Let me take a swig of water. Chapter 2, polygons and presence. Growing up in a town of 800 people in Australia, Robin Walker vividly remembers one daily 90-minute block of time from his childhood. It was the hour and a half between school ending and his parents picking him up to go back to their house, which they built for themselves in the Australian woods. One day during that time gap, Robin met a young boy named John Cook in the schoolyard. They quickly became friends, as did their dads, who would play guitar together some nights at Robin's house. Cook and Walker, however, were precocious kids more interested in computers than music. Robin even convinced his parents to buy him a BBC microcomputer. There was, however, a hitch. You couldn't buy any of the games in Australia. If you wanted to play something well, you had to code it on your own. Before long, Walker and Cook were programming rudimentary games in high school. Those skills came in handy at RMIT University in Melbourne, where Cook, known as Joji online, and Walker, Bro, shared a dorm room near the men's bathroom that had a prominent no dumping sign on the door. More interested in games than textbooks, Bro and Joji. There you can see actually Robin Walker and John Cook at university in Australia. Both eventually dropped out of college. Walker soon put his coding skills to use as a programmer for remote power stations in Australia and its island state, Tasmania. That paid the bills, but Walker's real interest in the mid-90s was, not surprisingly, video games. A particular favorite, Duke Nukem 3D, which added fun weapons like pipe bombs and trip mines to the familiar first-person shooter gameplay of Doom and Quake. Inspired by Duke 3D, Cook, Walker, and a third friend, Ian Scuba Cogley, programmed a modification for Quake called Team Fortress. It added 9 classes of heroes to the game, including a scout, sniper, demo man, medic, and heavy weapons guy. Once they uploaded it online, the internet and Valve took notice of their creation, called Quake Team Fortress. Cook and Walker moved to Seattle, joined Valve, and went on to create a modification or mod for Half-Life, similar to what they did for Quake. Team Fortress Classic hit the internet in 1999, and its sequel, Team Fortress 2, arrived in 2007 with a bright Pixar-like cartoony look unlike anything else on the market. Team Fortress's class-based gameplay won over legions of fans, but it was equally memorable for its online marketplace, where customers crafted hats and items to sell online. One enterprising fan even created Robin Walkers, team-colored animal slippers that appear as stylized robin heads worn with woolen socks to commemorate one of the game's creators. Not wooden socks. And there's Robin at his desk at Valve with a nice number one dad drawing from his daughter. Very sweet. Walker, like many other early developers at Valve, came out of the hobbyist mod scene that sprung up around id Software's Doom and Quake. It was easy for Valve to hire community developers because Half-Life's core technology is a licensed version of id's game engine. For Half-Life 2, Valve branched off from Quake with its own source engine, which gave developers new lighting, physics, rendering, and animation tools. Yet as Valve entered its second decade in 2006, the company realized its core source game technology was starting to show signs of age. To continue pushing the gaming medium forward, Valve needed to invest in building a whole new set of tools and technology. Source 2 engine. Blocks, wedges, cylinders, spikes. No matter what you want to create, these shapes are the building blocks for constructive solid geometry, the method a designer uses to build levels for a source engine game like Half-Life 2. A mathematical theory named binary space partitioning, or BSP trees, was actually first developed by the military. If you want to look it up, it's fascinating stuff. Orders the depth of these geometric objects in a world, thus creating the illusion of a 3D space inside your monitor. And this is something that John Carmack and id Software really pioneered. Carmack is the guy that figured out this idea of BSP trees as a way to render a 3D environment, and that's why, you know, if you remember the game Doom, the impact that had on the industry. Some of you may be too young to remember that, but it was so amazing to see like real-time 3D inside your computer, which again is so common now, but that was in 1993 when that came out. Remember that date, December 10th, 1993. It was revolutionary. This method of design works fine if you want to create a linear corridor or, say, an office building. But if your game design calls for something outdoors, such as a forest of trees or anything organic, brick-like constructive solid geometry is a particular restrictive creative palette. In Half-Life 2, the walls and floors and ceilings were built with BSP trees, but then we had props we jammed into the levels, explains Jay Stelly, the project lead of Half-Life 2, who is one of Valve's most senior technical programmers. Our engineers figured out how to link it all together with lighting and collision, so it worked in Half-Life 2, but we knew we needed to branch off of that process. There's some concept art of Half-Life 2 Episode 3. This is stuff I think that's been on the internet. But anyways, that desire came to a head in 2008 during the development of Half-Life 2 Episode 3, which was in the early stages of production. The development team was struggling to find ways to innovate with the gameplay, especially within the confines of the source engine. As more and more of the Episode 3 team moved on to helping ship Left 4 Dead and its sequel a year later, programmers like Stelly saw a window of opportunity to build a new game engine for when Valve returned to Half-Life. For Source 2, we wanted to create a polygon soup, Stelly explains. What does a polygon soup mean? Well, instead of building levels with a preset group of Legos, like constructive solid geometry, Source 2 would allow designers to construct levels with the freedom of a paintbrush. In the summer of 2010, Valve finished its first test of Source 2, recreating the rundown plantation in Left 4 Dead 2's Swamp Fever campaign with stunning detail. While it was more of a graphic test than a gameplay demo, the Louisiana swamp world featured lush trees, beautiful lighting, and a half-flooded river jetty. The visuals were awe-inspiring and far beyond anything Valve had been able to create in the previous Half-Life or Left 4 Dead games. And this is the video of the plantation test. I think some screens of this had leaked over the years from Valve. This is the first time we've ever seen real-time video footage. Again, this was 10 years ago that they created this internal prototype of what Source 2 engine might be able to do. And again, never released. This game never came out. This was more of just a test of what Left 4 Dead might look like in the Source 2 engine. So the Valve guy said, hey, we've never put this out, but, you know, people know it exists. Let's show it for the first time in Final Hours. So that's one of the cool videos that they gave us. And again, there are a ton of prototypes throughout the entire book. Everyone at Valve knew the investment in a new game engine was the right long-term approach. No one, however, expected the shift to trigger a dramatic slowdown in game production. Before it flirted with Source 2, Valve shipped a new game every year to customers between 2005 and 2011, ranging from Half-Life to Left 4 Dead to Portal. Games like Team Fortress 2 and Counter-Strike Go were updated continuously, and the MOBA strategy game Dota 2 was in production, but Valve's traditional games suddenly stopped after the release of Alien Swarm in 2010, which for a brief period was themed around Half-Life, and Portal 2 in 2011. We convinced ourselves that we should go work on engine technology before we worked on another Half-Life or another big game, recalls David Sprayer, a Cabal lead on the original Half-Life 2, who was also the lead development person for Episode 2. Sprayer, who rock climbs in his spare time, left 300 days a year of sun in Boulder, Colorado to come to the rainy confines of Seattle for Valve. In retrospect, I wish we would have figured out a way to keep building games and make a new game engine in the background, but that didn't happen. The ambition of building a brand new game engine was no small task, but it paled in comparison to some of the other bets Valve was about to make. If a series of high-quality, solid single and multiplayer games defined Valve's first decade, much grander ambitions fueled the second. Emboldened by the runaway success of its Steam platform, which charges most third-party developers a 30% royalty to distribute games on their service, Valve co-founder Gabe Newell began to have an even more ambitious dream for the next decade of Valve. We're frustrated by the lack of innovation in the computer hardware space, so we're jumping in, read a job listing on Valve's website in 2012. The innocuous posting was a rather bold proclamation that Valve had ambitions to do much more than build video games. The way Gabe Newell saw it, a company like Nintendo delivered genre-defining games like Super Mario 64 because it oversaw the full experience, not only the software, but also the game hardware. Shigeru Miyamoto wasn't just designing games, he was building the console and the game at the same time, and that delicate pas de deux is what makes Nintendo games genuinely magical. It's sort of that dance between the hardware and the software, and that elegant sort of combination is really what allows Nintendo to do things that are so special and unique. We wanted to build more core competencies at Valve, said Greg Coomer, one of the company's first employees, a brilliant graphic designer who served as one of the face models for Gordon Freeman in the original Half-Life. We had proven we were great at single-player, semi-narrative first-person shooters. Our new competency was Steam, which allowed us to deliver quicker updates to our customers. To us, making hardware was the natural next step in the service of making our existing customers happier. Valve's hardware ambitions began with a console-like controller for PC players to interact with games on their TVs and Steam machines, a failed attempt to create a Linux-based gaming computer. Valve sort of had done that because they were worried that Microsoft was going to lock Steam basically out of Windows, and that was sort of something that obviously would have been a big problem for Valve's business. So they were like, maybe we need to build our own computer. Didn't work out so well. Newell, however, was far from parochial in his view of Valve's hardware ambition or opportunity. He set his sights on forward investing Valve's Steam profits in something even more speculative, wearable computing. In the spring of 2012, Valve made its interest public. Writing on the Valve blog, programmer Michael Abrish, who is no longer at Valve, announced he was beginning to explore experiments with wearable computing. Hesitant to say Valve would ever ship such a product, Abrash invoked mention of Neil Stephenson's metaverse in Snow Crash and said he was starting to explore augmented reality, or Terminator vision, as he described it, as the next frontier in computing. And this is some of the first prototypes of Valve's VR headset that are on display at the office. Soon, what was a skunkworks R&D project turned into a whole floor of R&D at Valve, headed up by an inventor and computer chip designer named Jerry Ellsworth. You can follow her on Twitter. She's doing some really cool AR stuff still. Tens of millions of dollars would be invested in Valve's hardware lab to experiment not only with augmented reality, but also the potential of virtual reality headsets. In October 2012, the New York Times said Valve's pivot into hardware was perhaps an absurdly ambitious, some say foolish, enterprise. As Valve's hardware ambitions ramped up down in Irvine, California, a young inventor named Palmer Luckey was starting a hardware lab of his own in his parents' garage, mind you, as a Kickstarter for Oculus Rift, a virtual reality headset. Newell popped up in the Oculus Rift Kickstarter video in August 2012 and strongly encouraged fans to help back the $250K required for the headset, which promised gamers the ability to transport themselves to a different place. Valve had initially placed its bet on augmented reality, but by 2013, Newell had a change of heart, laid off a good portion of the hardware team, and did a quick pivot to virtual reality. So again, Valve's hardware lab was looking a little bit more into augmented reality, and then they kind of got rid of everybody and said, hey, we're going to pivot to VR. That's going to be our focus. And then that leads to this, The Room. I actually played this back at Valve in, I guess it was 2013 or so. And this was, as you can see here, is described. This is a room that sort of had like QR codes all around it. And these are called fiducials. And as you can see here, Valve's real innovation was they created presence in virtual reality. And by that, it meant that you could walk around in the environment. So you'd walk into this room, and they actually recreated the room in VR, and you would be able to like walk over to the light and touch the light. And it was this amazing one-to-one mapping. And Oculus Rift would allow you to look around, but you couldn't really move in and out of the space. And this presence technology that Valve did using a camera on the headset that would track, called inside-out tracking, was really revolutionary. And again, it's common now in VR, but Valve were the first people in the world to do that and figure that out, which is pretty amazing. The Room, located inside Valve's headquarters at the Skyline Tower in Bellevue, was a name for a particular office set up to showcase Valve's cutting-edge VR technology. With a series of black and white QR-like codes printed on the wall called fiducials, Valve's VR tech had something Oculus's didn't: presence. Oculus Rift's headset was more like an immersive window to peer into another world. Valve's system used cameras on the headset and the fiducials on the wall to track a player's movements through space. The result? Players in Valve's prototype VR weren't just looking around in another world, they were walking inside of it like on Star Trek's holodeck. Revealing the technology at Steam Dev Days in 2014, Michael Abrash said the idea of presence in VR could tip the balance of the entire entertainment industry towards computer entertainment. Valve, it seemed clear, was about to refashion itself as much more than a game developer. And I think that's such an important point, that Valve was now doing things that were going to impact the larger entertainment industry. The Vive and what Valve did with VR has had such huge impacts across many different fields, not just games. I think that's pretty spectacular that the company has grown into that. All right, Chapter 3, The Wilderness. And this is a chapter that we'll talk a little bit more about kind of where Valve was with a lot of canceled projects over the years. And that's one thing that I know a lot of you wanted to hear about, was not just Alyx, but kind of what has Valve been up to for the past decade. And I think initially Valve was not sure how much they wanted to get into this stuff, but over time it became clear that this actually would be okay to kind of be open and share with customers some of the things that they were working on and what really happened. So they were completely honest and shared everything with me about all the projects and what was canceled, and I was able to play some prototypes of things and ask questions about everything. So that was really cool that they were willing to share that with all of us and kind of explain what they were doing. All right, let me take another sip of water. Let's do Chapter 3. To understand just where Valve's game development teams have been over the past decade, you first need to understand just how the company operates. As Valve said in its publicly available handbook for new employees, first released in 2012, working at the company is a fearless adventure in knowing what to do when no one's there telling you what to do. Or as the website puts it, Valve is boss-free since 1996. And you can read the new employee handbook. There's a PDF of it that is out there. I think it might even be on Valve's website. Since no one person holds plenary power, the act of making a game becomes an exercise in building natural momentum around a project. At Valve, the coin of the realm is your desk. All desks are on wheels and roll in and out of development rooms on a moment's notice. At Valve, a decision or mandate rarely comes rumbling down through the ranks. As Michael Abrash said in a 2012 blog, there are things that Gabe badly wants the company to do that aren't happening because no one has signed up to do them. And again, this is really how Valve works. Gabe does not have a weekly status meeting where he's asking for updates on all these projects. People just kind of do what they want to do, and you have to convince other people to come on your projects. And it's not like you're assigned now to Left 4 Dead or you're assigned to Half-Life. You just sort of figure it out, which again is there's kind of good and bad aspects of that, but that's how Valve really works. That lack of hierarchy can sometimes take a while to accept, and it's far from perfect since certain employees naturally exert more influence due to their seniority or relationships. There still are, senior people at Valve that have more sway. There still are kind of, groups and cliques and like natural group dynamics are still a part of this. So it's not perfect by any means, but it's better, I think, than the other options out there, and certainly the sort of traditional command and control hierarchy that a lot of companies still operate under. I helped my friend plan her wedding on the way to the wedding, explains Valve engineer Geoff Linebaum, who also plays trumpet in the Emerald City Jazz Orchestra. I always made the first decision that could be overwritten. Here are two options. This is the one I'm picking. You can either agree or disagree. And that's like such a life thing, right? Of like, there's some people like, where do you want to go to dinner? And it's like, you don't know, but it's like, just pick something and see how someone reacts. But it's so many, it's just like, it's such a thing to think about. And that's how Valve sort of works. You're not given directive. You're not saying like, do you want to work on Left 4 Dead or Half-Life? You're like, come up with something new. Do what are you most interested in doing? Take your pick. At Valve, decisions lie squarely in the hands of employees, just like I said. There is, in effect, no first decision. I sometimes wish we had a bit more of that first decision here, but the advantage is that we get to end up doing some crazy shit, Linebaum admits with a laugh. There's a illustration by Tim O'Brien of Gabe Newell. Oh, Gaben. Look at that beard. Isn't that so beautifully illustrated? Everyone uses our photo of Gabe from Portal 2 Final Hours now. This is beautiful photo of Gabe. All right. Or illustration of Gabe. As far back as 2013, hives of Valve developers began experimenting with potential game ideas built on the in-development Source 2 game engine. Some were games fans would expect. Others were not, such as Valve's first role-playing game. Originally conceived as a new intellectual property, Valve's role-playing game, yes, called RPG, was inspired by titles like Monster Hunter, Dark Souls, and even The Elder Scrolls. People wanted to make an RPG game modularly in public, like shipping smaller parts of an experience over time and add features, explains Geoff, a developer who joined Valve to work on Portal 2. He worked on the paint in Portal 2, and I told the story of his student project in the final hours of Portal 2. And he also briefly worked on the RPG project, although he wasn't on it that long. RPG never really left the conceptual stage. At one point, the team experimented with flipping it into a single-player Dota RPG starring Axe the Grunt in the Army of the Red Mist. And this was also going to have some co-op components to it. There was a lot of kind of experimentation because Valve was looking to maybe do some sort of story-driven single-player Dota games. And RPG kind of started as an original intellectual property, then became a Dota thing, and then ultimately died out. Other potential Source 2 projects were more familiar, like an exploration of a new Left 4 Dead game. In 2013, a team of nearly 30 developers dreamed of an open-world Left 4 Dead 3. The game, with a story set in Morocco, would have featured hundreds of zombies. But it wasn't long until the team discovered the Source 2 engine was nowhere near ready to take on such an ambitious project. Every other playtest, pieces of your base would go missing and zombies would float in, remembers Don Holden, a programmer at Valve. Beyond RPG and Left 4 Dead, there was another Source 2 project headed up by Dave Speyer. Sitting in a conference room at Valve, Speyer begins to talk about the genesis of that project, which began in 2013 in broad general terms. We were working on this single-player game that would use proceduralism in concert with crafted experience to create something played in an open-ended way, he says. Robin Walker, who's sitting in the room, overhears Dave and begins to chuckle. Dave, what was the name of your team again? He asked with a smirk on his face. Did your project have a name in its title? This was a fun moment that I remember from working on this because everyone they never wanted to say Half-Life 3. And it was like, they even wanted me to like turn off my tape recorder when we started talking about this almost, because it was just like so sensitive that they were going to admit that they had done this. But anyways, Speyer lets out a breath, shakes his head, and looks directly at Walker, realizing what he's finally about to say. Yes, that project was called Half-Life 3. While names and numbers don't often mean much at Valve in the early days of a project's gestation, Speyer and a small team had spent more than a year prototyping a potential next step for the Half-Life franchise using Source 2. At first, the work involved porting more than 350 entities from Half-Life 2 over to the Source 2 engine, such as characters, objects, and other files. And this is important, I think, for everyone to understand, is that Valve doesn't really always ever lead with story. So a lot of people ask me, it's like, oh, well, I know Mark Laidlaw had his Epistle 3, and like they had all these story ideas. And at Valve, it starts really with what is the gameplay going to be, and then the story wraps around it. I mean, as you see with the story of Alyx, it's like they kind of almost like redid the story in the last year because they weren't happy with it. But Half-Life 3, there was no master plan of like, here's the plot. Even Episode 3, it's kind of like, let's figure out what the cool gameplay is going to be, and then let's figure out how to have the story support it. So anyways, the core idea of Half-Life 3 was to rebirth Half-Life as a more replayable experience. It was sort of inspired by Left 4 Dead, which was always fun no matter how many times you played it, Dave remembers. So I think that's an important point to make, is that Valve was, I think, getting frustrated that single-player games were kind of, you'd play once and you were done with them. But Left 4 Dead, it was always fun to have skirmishes and kind of, go into the game with friends and have a new co-op experience. So I think Valve was starting to think about, like, well, how could we evolve the formula of Half-Life to include something that was a little more emergent in terms of how you played it. The game would find a building, seal up all the windows so there was only one way in, put a citizen or prisoner somewhere in the building, and then populate the building with enemies, Speyer remembers. You, as the player, would have to find a way to get into the building and locate the prisoner. The route was naturally different every time, sort of, just like randomized dungeons. It was going to be a little bit randomized about what the experience was. Conceptually, these procedurally generated skirmishes would fit in between more crafted story moments that players had grown to love in traditional Half-Life games. Some of those crafted moments were likely to feature the G-Man, the mysterious interdimensional bureaucrat who's a hallmark of Half-Life games. In 2010, artist Matt Charlesworth and the team did a top-secret photo scan session with Frank Sheldon, the man whose face formed the basis for G-Man's look in Half-Life 2. The artists were quite chuffed when Sheldon showed up to the scan session in a full suit and tie. The resulting 3D scans served as reference points for as a team started exploring how to bring character animation to life in Source 2. And you hear this humming. This is something you can, if you play Alyx, you're familiar with this. David, our programmer, did an amazing job recreating somewhere called the toner puzzles at Valve from Half-Life Alyx, where you have to sort of get electricity somewhere else. This is something you use Alyx's multi-tool to search around for these in the environment. We start our puzzles quite easy, but the idea is you got to connect the circuits. So a couple clicks, looks like 3 clicks, 4 clicks. We solved it. So throughout the app, there are a bunch of these unlocks where you solve the puzzle and you get access to some art, which is tons of fun. So this is from Half-Life 2 Raising the Bar book. This is Frank Sheldon, the face of G-Man. Again, this was scanning back, 15 years ago, where they wrote on his face with paint. This is never before seen. This was the 2010 scan session with him. They brought him back, did a more of a 3D scan of him. G-Man, right? Can you see it right there? Gordon Freeman. And then this is him in his suit for the scan session. Miss Vance. And then this is actually one of the 3D models that they based the scan session on. This was very early stuff that Matt Charlesworth did. It's not what they actually used for Half-Life Alyx, but they were experimenting with a G-Man in Source 2. Half-Life 3, however, suffered from a similar fate to Left 4 Dead 3, an unfinished Source 2 engine. It was hard to build a first-person shooter on Source 2 at the time, Speyer recalls. There was no lighting solution, no save and restore, no visibility solution. A huge amount of tech was needed, and we honestly didn't get very far. With Half-Life 3, Left 4 Dead 3, and an RPG prototype simultaneously in development on an unfinished and unstable Source 2 engine in 2014, something had to give. The engine wasn't in a state for a full team to be on it, much less multiple game teams pulling in different directions, Stelly freely admits. Source 2 was, in some ways, becoming a victim of Brooks' Law, a famous software maxim that says adding manpower to a late software project makes it later. It's a law of limited divisibility. An example, while it takes a woman 9 months to birth a baby, 9 women can't make a baby in 1 month. So even if Valve wanted to rapidly ramp up Source 2 development to support all its babies, it soon realized it needed to take a big step back before it could step forward. And that was a lot of what went on, is that Valve was trying to create games with an engine that didn't work. And it'd sort of be like, if you were in Photoshop or Premiere and it didn't work. That's sort of what was happening. And if the base is kind of broken or rotten, it's very hard to build anything on top of it. Now, because of the uncertainty around Source 2, another team at Valve started work on a project with its own proprietary technology base, its own engine, a voxel-based game engine, now referred to internally as Arty. This fun, lighthearted game, in a similar vein to the Portal series, transported players to a manipulable world with full construction and destruction abilities, not unlike Minecraft. An early demo featured a talking character named King Kevin, voiced by Valve writer Eric Wolpaw. Players helped the king break out of prison by using their abilities such as tearing down walls, building bridges, and shrinking animals and objects to impact the world in real time. And Valve was so kind to share with the world some images from this game. I got to play a demo of Arty. It eventually became a VR project, so I played through it in VR, and it's so much fun. It's very Portal-like. With the voices and the look and feel of it. It's super fun. And again, it's a voxel world, so you could literally go and pick blocks out of things and destroy and shrink and grow things. Tons of fun. A really amazing game. But this is some of the art from it that, again, no one has seen. Look at this, these little lab with these characters, and just so much fun. This is the world. You can obviously see the voxel Minecraft-like feel to it. This is one of the caves in the world, and then another area here. So I remember playing this part. You're sort of up on this pedestal, and you're interacting, and there's, again, really fun game that never shipped. But they worked on it for many, many years. With more than a half dozen different games in development in 2013, including Dota 2, Team Fortress, and Counter-Strike, the invisible self-directed hand of Valve had suddenly led the company in a dizzying array of directions. The way we're set up, the idea is to work on whatever you want, Robin Walker explains to me one morning near his desk. It's an enormous thing to start something new if only 2 other projects are going on. That's just the natural law of dynamics. If there are only 2 options, to add a third is very difficult. But if there are 10 other projects, it's a lot easier to create yet another branch, Robin says. I think that's true. If everyone's split off in their own little fiefdoms, it's much easier to say, hey, you know what? I've got another one. A lot harder when there's only one thing happening in a company. To borrow a term from aviation, Valve is at risk of falling into an unrecoverable flat spin, driven by too many projects and an unstable Source 2 engine. Valve's diluted focus became a recipe for frustration bordering on disaster. The company entered a season of discontent so disruptive that Walker refers to it by a singular name, the wilderness. There's a period of time the start of a project when you sort of don't know what you're building, especially if you're innovating, he says one day over lunch in Valve's expansive 15th floor cafe that overlooks the Seattle skyline. I mean, if you know everything about your game at the start, you must have played something like that before. I think that was a really perceptive quote on the part of Robin, is that when you're trying to innovate, you can't say, oh, this game is like Doom, but with the character progression of Skyrim or something like that. You kind of can't describe it. Like Portal, how do you describe that? It's just something new and different, and some games sort of have to find their way if they're really truly trying to be innovative and different. Here's a fun script from Arty, the project I just showed you. Jay Pinkerton and Eric Wolpaw put this up with King Kevin, and I'll let you read through this, but it's a fun little script that they gave us that was unfinished. So there are parts of it here where I think, where is he? He says something where it's like a bunch of gobbledygook. Oh yeah, so it's like Kevin heard, and he says ASD, FASF. That's just them kind of saying we don't have a joke for that yet, but we'll eventually figure it out. All right, At the time, more than a half dozen teams were trying to innovate within the limits of a fractured and unstable game engine that couldn't rapidly prototype ideas. The result? Everyone on a team was closing their eyes and imagining a different vision for each project, Walker remembers. When that happens, you are in the quote-unquote wilderness, and you only exit it when everyone closes their eyes and imagines similar things. I think ultimately game development is a continuum of this, he concludes. With multiple projects stuck in the wilderness, Valve found itself pulled across numerous dimensions. We sort of spread ourselves too thin technologically, and then we got spread too thin game-wise, admits Michael Coupland, the guy who hadn't shipped a game at Valve in 11 years. By the end of 2014, Valve hadn't shipped a single-player experience in 3 years. While there were plenty of games in various stages of design, there were no signs of one being ready to release to customers anytime soon. By the end of 2014, the Half-Life 3, Left 4 Dead 3, and RPG projects were all paused until the Source 2 engine became more stable. There was, however, one Source 2 project that was about to step out of the wilderness, a demo to reveal the Vive, Valve's first ever VR headset. And this is a little timeline, interactive timeline that actually takes you through all the years of Valve, and you can see on here, they're working on Half-Life 3 in 2013 and 14, Left 4 Dead 3, RPG game, Arty. As you can see here, there was like a time where they were doing RPG, Half-Life 3, Left 4 Dead 3, and Arty, and also Dota, all in sort of a period of time. And then there's some other games that we'll get to later in the story about Borealis VR, Hot Dog, and then a bunch of other titles, all leading up to Half-Life Alyx's release on March 23rd, 2020. And we can also add in all Valve's hardware here. Later in the story, we talk about Vader, which was a VR headset that Valve had developed before the Index that never shipped. They canceled that. And then we add in Steam as well here, and you can see kind of all the crazy Steam stuff that they did over the years. So this is an amazing timeline. Again, David and Chuck did such a great job bringing this all to life. You can see all this stuff. So anyways, that is the end of chapter 3. I said I was going to read 3 chapters, so I did it. But I will quickly talk about, I mean, if you buy the app or you support this project, which I really appreciate because these are not cheap. We're working, all of us worked really hard on it. A lot of cool stuff. Like you can see, this is so cool. We've got like the actual G-Man model, doing fun stuff with him here in this chapter, God in a box. We've also got some really cool stuff with some interactive music stuff. We've got a head crab sound mixer where you can use all the component sounds that Roll and Shot Valve used to create the head crab, and kind of mix your own head crab, which is kind of cool in there. And then just lots of other great stuff with 3D models of you can see City 17, just lots of cool stuff, where you can see a bunch of the characters we bring to life. Puzzles, but you can see there's a Combine Captain. You can kind of check that out, which is really cool. I'll also show you. Really proud of this. We did a cool thing with the Alyx's hands that you can see here in the app. We can actually kind of like, let me see here. Yeah. So here's her hands. You can kind of actually like interact and see the gloves and understand kind of all the different elements of it. One cool thing that we reveal here in the app is that inside this watch case on Alyx's gloves, there's a tiny shard of the Zen crystal that powers Gordon's gravity gun in Half-Life 2, and that is what gives the Russells or gravity gloves the ability to lift and pull objects. So anyone that remembers the gravity gun and the fun of that in Half-Life 2, that's actually inside of these watch cases, and that's what powers the gloves. And that's something I didn't know, but the team at Valve said that's the lore. So that's the app. I don't want to spoil too much of it. Hopefully you guys will download it and check it out and read it. I appreciate all the support. Not the easiest thing to put together, but we're really proud of it. And then the other thing which is really neat is this 3D tour of Valve. Work with this company named Matterport to allow people to navigate around Floor 14 where they built Half-Life Alyx. And what's amazing about this is you can literally scroll around here, see the office. This is the lobby of Valve right here, and this is where they built Half-Life Alyx. Kind of insane that right off the lobby, like this is the elevator right here. You get out, you come in the lobby, and then like little do people know on the other side of the lobby was like for 4 years, this is where they made Half-Life Alyx. So you can This is amazing, the technology. We just scanned all this, and you can see a top-down view of the office, but you can also kind of jump in and pan around. There's the Dota, the Valve. You can jump back here, see all this craziness. You can go into this room. You can see their Game Awards. I promise I didn't tell them to put them here, but they've got their 2 Game Award statues there. And lots of fun drawings on the whiteboards. But one thing that is so amazing in this is you can actually jump into a first-person mode and walk around Valve. And this is kind of experimental. It's not perfect, but we found a way to basically like let people look around. And again, this is the hallway here. You can see a little bit of Combine influence to the architecture in the room. And this is something where you can just go in, and these are all the desks, and these are where everyone worked on Half-Life Alyx. This is Christine Fallan's desk. You can go down here. I know everyone's desk because I spent so much time here. This is Jay Benson's desk. And just to prove that this is real, there's Jay Benson's Half-Life CD at his desk. He moved it from his speaker here, but to over here. And this is lots of cool stuff. There's some concept stuff of In the Valley of Gods, which we were announced at the Game Awards, which was put on hold last year. So lots of fun stuff, and I'm sure there's probably things on these whiteboards that people are analyzing online. Robin Walker's desk is right down here. There's the #1 dad piece of art that his daughter gave him. You can see a better version if you go to the panorama. And you actually see right there, says Robin Walker on the card. Anyway, so it's really fun that we were able to kind of take you inside of Valve, and this is how they develop games at Valve. And, you know, if you ever aspire to one day work at Valve, this is where you'd be working. And I think it's so cool that they gave us the opportunity to kind of show this to you guys. So that is kind of the first 3 chapters of Half-Life Alyx. Love this title screen. I could just stay on this forever. And let me come back to me so we can chat more about all things Half-Life Alyx. So if you guys have any questions, I know we've already been live for a while, but I'm happy to answer a couple questions on Steam here and see what you guys think. So yeah, I'm gonna go to the Steam chat. That's where I'll be, and I'll answer some questions about the app for a little bit. So drop your questions, and I'm not gonna be able to read through all the chat messages, but let's see what everyone has to say. I've spent hours walking through the office and reading everything on the whiteboards, Valet said. Yeah, we figured you guys would do that. That's why we had to, there are things, our team worked very hard to blur things for a while to make sure that there was nothing that shouldn't be there. So hopefully we did a good enough job, but I'm sure if there was something, I think people already found Valve's public Wi-Fi password or something. So please ask Gabe to release pictures of the Vader prototype. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we didn't include Vader stuff. It's potential. I mean, I think, you know, they may use that design in the future. One of the things that we often don't do in these apps is sometimes show things that Valve may use in the future and other products. Like when I did the Portal 2 app, one of the reasons we didn't include f-stop, which was a feature of that, is because Valve might use that in the future. So that's something to think about. How long did it take me to put this together? It was probably about 6 months of work. I mean, I've been doing other things. I've got this Summer Game Fest thing going on, but our team really worked for kind of, I would say, probably 4 to 6 months to put it all together. And I was obviously visited Valve many times over the years and was up there for a couple of weeks earlier this year before the pandemic, working with everyone. So I was there, in February was the last time I was really at Valve was in February. Early February, believe it or not. I was supposed to go up again for the actual final hours in March, but that was all done work from home. So that's how it worked out. Let's see. Next question. Lots of questions. Did I get the chance to play the Borealis VR game? I did not play that. That was not in a state where there really was like a prototype demo that I saw or knew about. So some of these games were so early that there wasn't, really versions to play. probably post this up on YouTube later. Yeah, someone's asking about a light mode. We've looked into it. It's the way we develop the app. It's a little challenging to just without having to like literally redo the entire app. We've talked about maybe the idea of inverting the text and things like that because we want to be as accessible as possible. So it is something we're looking into. I don't know how realistic it is that we're going to be able to do that, but I think we've talked about maybe a way of like inverting the text or something for people. So a few people have mentioned that, and it's definitely something I'd like to be able to support. We've also talked about, is there a way to, have me do an audio reading of it, like an audiobook or something. So there are a bunch of different options that we're pursuing. If it does kind of well enough that we can kind of afford to keep going with it, I think we definitely want to try and add more features and stuff like that to it. So we hope that will happen. Glad you enjoyed it. Does Valve have any other big scope VR projects in the works currently? Not that I know of. Certainly nothing on the scale of Alyx, right? Which was a huge percentage of the company working on it. There's always the possibility that something new will come along, but I think Alyx was a massive VR project. And there's certainly nothing of that scale that I know of that Valve is working on right now. Is everything about doing a video doc? Yeah, we had talked about doing some podcast stuff and longer video pieces. Unfortunately, with the pandemic and the development of the game and everything, we just didn't be able to get that. I would love to do a real final hours video documentary at some point. We haven't been able to make that happen yet, but on my roadmap of things to do in my life, I would like to do a really big video documentary. It's also harder to do video documentary pieces because it's more invasive to sort of have cameras and lights and everything around versus just me observing things. So it's harder to sometimes get the full story because these developers are working extremely hard on their games and development of their games. So it sometimes becomes a challenge to sort of interrupt them or disruptive. Any news about the beta versions of Half-Life you have? People ask me about that. I am not going to release those unless Valve allows me to. It's like just like all the other ROMs and betas of games, I'm not going to post those for people to check out. So if Gabe and Valve says, let's get them out there to the world, maybe we'll talk about it. But otherwise, I think I'll have them archived, and maybe there'll be some way at some point we'll be able to let people check stuff out. But yeah, it's not my content to share with people, honestly. And I wouldn't feel right just sort of like putting things out there. Yes, I did play the RD VR version, and that was really fun. I did get to play that game. Do you know if Gabe works on projects at Valve, or is he just a CEO and leads the company? Gabe, I think, picks kind of the things that he wants to focus on. He wasn't really that involved in Alyx. I mean, he was aware of it and stuff, but those teams are self-directed. I think he's more interested in a lot of the VR stuff right now and hardware and brain-computer interfaces and other things like that. But yeah, he really, I don't think even he really reviewed Alyx. He just sort of let them do what they wanted to do with it. And if the team was interested in making it happen, I think he was supportive of the idea of them building that product, but I don't think it certainly wasn't involved day to day. Geoff, considering all this information being released about Valve's previous products, what does it tell us about their future products? Good question. I don't know. I think what's good is that Source 2 is in a stable state where they can make more games now. So part of Half-Life Alyx was getting things like the animation system and other systems in Source 2 working to a level that they could produce other games. So I think it means that they can do more now. Will they do single-player games? Will they do multiplayer games? Will they do VR stuff? I think that's sort of an unknown. Based on where they are now, I think there's a lot of momentum around trying to do another big project. But, how many years that'll take, who knows? I mean, I don't think it's imminent that there's anything coming out anytime immediately. But I think there's definitely momentum to do something big. So will that be Half-Life 3? Will that be something else? Will it be another Left 4 Dead? I don't know. I don't think Valve really knows. And again, they don't plan out their product slate or portfolio. They try a bunch of things, see how it goes. And, this year especially is difficult with the pandemic and everyone's still working from home. Things are a lot slower, so it may take longer than we think for the next project to come out. Did Valve ask me to remove things? That's a good question. No, not really. I fact check things with Valve. They actually, to their credit, actually wanted to add things to it. They looked at. I showed them a version of it last week or whatever before it came out, and they were like, "Oh, we actually want to add the script from Artie, and we have some other art we want you to include." So, you know, we removed things off some of the whiteboards in the VR tour just because there was stuff that was personal and like people's family photos and things like that. So like that kind of stuff, I actually wanted them to give us guidance on things to remove from that. But no, there was nothing where they're like, why are you talking about Half-Life 3? We don't want to talk about that or anything like that. They really honestly trusted me. So we made a couple small factual things and added a few things to it. But yeah, in terms of deletions or removals, no, there was nothing really that, to their credit, like it wasn't like, we think you got this wrong, or, you know, there was like factual stuff. Like I think I said Christine Falan was 4'11" and she was actually 5'2" and things like that. So there's sort of like factual things that I fact checked with them just to make sure I was right. But no, they were really supportive, and it's special that they trusted me to do something. And no, they were like, wow, this is more positive than we thought it was going to be, I think. Because it's like they were prepared to sort of, you know, be aware of the, you know, the concern around like what they were doing for all these years. So no, I mean, I really respect that and honor that they let me sort of do the work that I want to do around this app. And some people ask like, oh, is this, you know, did Valve pay you to do it or whatever? It's like, no, this is really like my own thing that I put together, and Valve supports it and, you know, allows me to do it, which is great. But Final Hours have always kind of been that way. They've always been independent. These are not like, you know, company sanctioned project. They're sanctioned, but they're not sort of marketing efforts on the part of the companies. What were my impressions of Half-Life Alyx when I played it for the first time? I was blown away. That inspired me to want to do this story, right? Because when I first talked to Robin about it, I was like, you know, VR it's a small market, and I was wondering like what the addressable audience would be. And I think as I got into it, I'm like, no, this is a story about more than just Half-Life Alyx. It's a story about Valve and where the company is going and where it's been. So I was very impressed though with Alyx. I mean, it was the fidelity of it, the visuals were great, and even like some of the early prototypes that we show in the app of Shooter, which was the version of kind of a Half-Life VR thing that was going to be in the lab. Even that was like super fun. Let's see. You think I can tell you something about the development of Half-Life Alyx that wasn't included in the app? Sure, I'm trying to think what I could tell you. I'm just trying to think of things that I put a lot in the app. Yeah, what did we not talk about? It's a good question. I come back to you on that. I'm trying to think like what we not talk about that was in the app. I mean, there was some stuff. There's some art we didn't include. There's a lot of stuff that, like, you know, they gave me so much stuff we actually didn't include at all. There's some really interesting concepts of the Reviver head crab and how that evolved, which is a cool part of the game, and sort of that. So there's some cool art there that we looked at that we just didn't include. So I guess that's one piece that we didn't sort of get into was the Reviver head crab and the story of that, which is interesting. So there was some cool art from that Naru Arami, who did also the stuff for the Blind Zombie. He's a really talented guy and did some great concepts for that. Am I currently working on any other big projects like this? No, I do not have another big Final Hours that I'm currently working on. It'll probably be a while, honestly, until the next one. I got to find the right game and the right project. Let's see. Do I think Half-Life 3 will be VR as well? I don't know. My hunch is no. I don't think they'd ever do Half-Life 3 as a VR game. If they do Half-Life 3, I think it'll be a game that you can just play on a regular computer or console. But I don't know, you know, maybe there'll be a VR mode, or maybe there'll be another VR thing in Half-Life. But I don't think they would ever do Half-Life 3 only as a VR game. Let's see. Wasn't you going to work on the first hours of Half-Life 2 at one point? Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, I was. Originally, for Half-Life 2, I was going to do something called the first hours of Half-Life 2, which is going to tie to the announcement of the game. And I went up to Valve. I did reporting on that. We started to write it, and then Gabe called me and said, actually, we're not going to announce the game this year anymore. It wasn't good enough. So it was going to be announced around E3 at 2000, I don't know what year it was, 2002 or 3 maybe or something. And yeah, Gabe said that we're not ready, so then I didn't do it. And I just held all that reporting for what ended up being the final hours later. But yes, we were going to do the first hours of Half-Life 2 back in the day. You've done your research. Yes, I don't worry about disc rot. We're all good with those betas, guys. Can we expect a VR game section at the next Game Awards? Yeah, we have best VR game category, or best immersive reality category. We've had it for a couple years. I think Beat Saber won it last year. I think won the year before. But yeah, we always have that. So we'll have a VR category for sure. I mean, Alyx will be eligible in all categories, right? In addition to VR. So it'll be interesting to see how it does, because it's like, I think at a caliber of it certainly being able to be nominated for a bunch of the genres and craft categories and Game of the Year, but it's VR only, so it'll be hard to compete probably against a TLU or Cyberpunk or whatever, but we'll see. Was Alyx developed on Source 2? Yes, it was. Geoff, do you think it's okay to charge for something like this when other companies have added things like this into the final copy of their games? I'm not aware of anything like this being in a game. I know people have done like video documentaries and making ofs and stuff. This is not just about a game. It's really about a company, and it's about all the canceled projects and everything. I mean, Alyx is certainly probably a good half of the story. There's a lot of other stuff. So yeah, I mean, honestly, we charge for it because it costs money to make. I have to, I have an amazing team that was super kind to work with me on it, but it's like people have to be paid to do things, and this was not, it's not cheap. We're not, it's, again, hopefully the guys think it's fair for the amount of content there. And again, I guess, I could have probably gone to Valve and said, hey, do you guys want to pay to have me do this and include it in the game as an added feature? But I like to keep things sort of editorially separate and do my own thing and let hopefully the community support it. So it is kind of editorially distinct from just something that like is an option on the menu. I think Valve is going to at some point hopefully do like commentary nodes and Alyx and give people more content that way. So again, it's an option, but I really don't, I like that I get to do things kind of independently, and hopefully the community supports it. And that's been the way it's been. So yeah, I'm fine. People do making ofs of these games too. So Valve's done other stuff on their own and their own videos and other things. And it's not, there's no exclusive of me on being the only person to talk about this stuff. So if game companies want to do stuff like that, they can too. Some of the people who left Valve stayed there for years with no games being released. Those people had to come to the office every day and do what? Question mark. Laidlaw and Bailey, for example. People worked on projects. I mean, Mark worked on Borealis VR, which is his project. And also a lot of people worked on things like Dota and Counter-Strike. And those are the games that, Valve has a lot of big games. And like even the writers, they were working on Dota. And like, it's funny, people say like Valve didn't do anything, but it's like Valve has Dota, which is one of the biggest MOBAs in the world. Counter-Strike, which is one of the biggest games for esports, continues to be. There are a lot of titles that Valve still works on. So those guys kind of helped out on those. And they're not necessarily always doing new projects, but there were always games happening at Valve. It wasn't like they were sitting around surfing the internet all day. Have I played any of the fan maps for Half-Life Alyx? I haven't. I want to. I've been so busy shipping this game, I haven't had a chance to do it, but I definitely want to check out some of them. Can you tell Valve to hurry the F up with the index, please? I imagine that's because indexes are hard to come by and out of stock. I mean, it's difficult this year with the pandemic and production of anything. So let's see. No, I need to play workshop maps. All right, let's see some more here. Do you think we'll get to play a release of Artie at some point? Yeah, it's a really awesome game. I don't know what Valve's plans are with that. I don't think so. but there's obviously the possibility that is there an ARG in this app? No, there's no like ARG or tease of Half-Life 3 that I know of. I don't think so. All right, a couple more questions. Again, there's so many questions coming through. What do I do after the story? I don't know. I have Summer Game Fest going on right now. You can check out summergamefest.com. I have Gamescom opening night live coming up, which we're working really hard on, and then we're in the middle of working on all things Game Awards, which will be coming up later this year as well. So I kind of have turned my attention fully to those projects now, and will for the rest of the year. The Game Awards takes a good 5 or 6 months of my year to work on, so I will not have another final hour soon, but hopefully more. I'd like to do a podcast at some point too. I've been developing some concepts there. I don't know what that will probably be next year at this point, just because my bandwidth gets limited. But what's that? Will I release a mobile version of this app? We've talked about it potentially. We have to figure out kind of what that looks like. We have to kind of hopefully make our money back on this version, and then we can look to other things. Valve said they were working on 3 titles. There's no such thing on the timeline, something to spoil us. We talk about it in the text, what those 3 games were. There was a game called Simtrek. There was Artie turned into a VR project, and then Alyx. Simtrek and Artie ceased development, so really all that was left was Alyx, and that's the answer to that story. So that's what happened. That's why Valve was pretty open about all that stuff. Is Valve planning to release an art book for HLA? I don't think so. There has been talk about some kind of art release in some way, but I think they don't have as much concept art as some of the other games because they move so quickly into development. So that's something that they're sort of trying to work through, but I don't think there's any immediate plans for an art book release based on what I've heard, which is really cool. All right, guys. Well, I got to bounce. Thanks for joining my live reading of the final hours of Half-Life Alyx. If you haven't bought it, check it out. It's available now on Steam for Mac and PC. The Mac version was delayed a day, but it is now available as well. So you can check those out, which is really fun. And we will, I don't know, maybe I'll come back and do another live stream. Maybe I'll bring some guys from Valve, or I don't know. We'll figure it out. But we got lots more going on. I got my Summer Game Fest thing going on, so if you guys want to check that out, I will be live with more Summer Game Fest stuff tomorrow. Ubisoft has their event, and there'll be more coming up. So thanks for tuning in. This was a long stream, almost 2 hours, but great to chat with everyone. I got to go get some more water, work on some other things. But thanks for tuning in, guys. We'll see you on the next one, or see you at Summer Game Fest. Check it out, summergamefest.com. I will be live again tomorrow with the Ubisoft event. But for now, thanks for watching, guys. Thanks for supporting the final hours, and we will see you soon, hopefully. Take care.